He'll be talking about context setting and the overview of the National Policy Development and Management Framework. So, Professor Adeyanju will be discussing with us this morning and taking a look at an overview of the National Policy Development and Management Framework. Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way back into the hall as we continue the validation session, stakeholders validation session. Our next speaker Professor Shola Adeyanju, MNI, member of the National Institute. He is currently the head of Public Affairs Department, comprising of PR, Media, Protocol, Multimedia Units, and Advancement of the Office of the Institute. He holds a first class in Mass Communication and a PhD in Mass Communication. First class, ABU Zaria, PhD, Mass Communication, University of Ibadan. We will continue without you if you don't make your way back into the hall. Thank you. Let's save our time. All right, welcome back. Although we're about 10 minutes behind schedule, I think we can continue from where we stopped. If you flip the program, we're on number 9, and that is context setting and the overview of the National Policy Development and Management Framework. That session will be handled by Professor Shola Adeyanju. Professor Adeyanju is the head of Public Affairs Department, comprising of PR, Media Protocol, and Multimedia Units of the National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies. And I forgot to add, he is Professor Shola Adeyanju, MNI, that is Member National Institute. He's a lecturer, a communication strategist, a research methodologist with over 25 years' experience in communication studies. He holds a first class in mass communication from Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, and a PhD from the University of Ibadan, a complete Nigerian. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Shola Adeyanju is also the Deputy Chief Operating Officer Communication at the Political Parties Leadership and Policy Development Center at the National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies. He will be taking us through context setting and an overview of the National Policy Development and Management Framework once we are settled, and that will be in about 2 minutes. Let me take a moment to recognize the presence of Professor BKU Farouk, Professor of Business Management, Nigeria Defense Academy. She's actually the HOD of Management Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for her. Right. And I believe everyone is settled down now, and we are ready. This is why we are here. Professor Adeyanju, can we have you on the podium? Thank you. Oh, okay. He came from, I was expecting to see someone coming from that side. Thank you. I love the adire.
Thank you very much, the anchor. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I wouldn't want to go through any protocol again, since we have done all that during the opening ceremony. My job this morning is to set the tone for what we'll be discussing today. And to do that, I'll be looking at context setting and the overview of the framework which we are here to validate today. And in doing that, I will quickly hello? Okay. It's not responding. Where is it located? No, you just put it's not. It's not responding. Because I sure the battery is not weak. Sorry for the hitch. We are trying to fix it. All right, I think we are back. Thank you very much. So for a proper understanding of this framework, we need to give the background to how we arrived at where we are today. And I want to establish the fact that after looking at the policies and the implementation within the country, the conclusion is that the tendency is there for you to assume what others do say, and I think it has been mentioned here this morning. People will tell you we have policies, it is implementation that is our problem. And we tend to say that if you have a policy which is having problem of implementation, it means that the policy is not good in the first instance. Because if the policy is good, it will have taken care of the implementation process. So we can't continue to say we have policies, but implementation is our problem. And that is the more reason why we need to look into the policy frameworks and the structure in the country. Also, as the office of the SA is talking about policy coordination, and I think most speakers this morning also alluded to that, the fact that we have policies, but we lack some level of coordination and harmonization. So it is on the basis of this that, having looked at the whole thing, and of course I did a quotation by the SA here, which says that in today's complex and interconnected world, public policy must balance vision with pragmatism, ambition with feasibility. In other words, there will never be any time in history where you have enough resources to achieve all you want to achieve. But whatever resources you have, the question is how have you been able to utilize those resources? And that was one of the reasons why we decided to look into this. And I'm taking it off from the point that this whole idea came from the SA, and from the National Institutes, we were approached and we took this very seriously. So I must commend the determination of the SA for Policy Coordination and Delivery Units on ascertaining that there is a need for a framework. And why do we need that framework? Because one may be asking, why do you need this framework? Some of the reasons have been given this morning, but for me to say, for us to have a coordinated focus as a country, we need a framework which will guide everybody in how both to formulate the policies and how the policies will flow by speaking to themselves. And we need some level of uniformity, of course, if you want to do a proper analysis, and Ministry A is doing its policy totally different from what Ministry B is doing, it becomes very problematic for you to coordinate and analyze. And we also need to establish the fact that policymakers, we have to look at it from a systemic point of view. In other words, a system is made up of other subsystems. If the subsystems are malfunctioning, then the overall goal of the system cannot be achieved. And that is one of the reasons why we need some level of coordination. And of course, there must be a platform for that. And that platform we are trying to establish now is the framework which we are considering today. We looked at it from two different perspectives. First is the perspective of having a framework that will guide the formulation process and the content. The second one is to actually harmonize the policies that we have in the country to make sure, we avoid things like overlap, things like contradictions. If Ministry A is going to be formulating policies, which are the other line ministries that will be affected with that policy? Does it necessarily necessitate removing another policy from somewhere else? If all these are not given consideration, then it becomes problematic. And that is why we do have what they call policy somersault so often. So we looked at it to say we need to take care of these two areas. And on the basis of that, we set up the process to have what we have today as a framework. And what are those? The first is to set up a committee of stakeholders to see those that can come together to help us look at what we have on ground and what we should have in the real sense of it. And on the basis of that, these organizations were actually identified. NAPES, Economic Summit Group. As we have mentioned earlier on, the FCDO PACE, Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation. Of course, Office of the Vice President was also included, and the MDAs and other experts. So these people were put together at different levels to bring up what we have today as a draft framework for us to consider. And having set up this committee set to work, organizing consultative forum, meeting several times, sourcing for materials from all areas, all MDAs and many other organizations were consulted to see what is it that we have on ground. What exactly do we have on ground? Because as they said that if you forget your past, you will forfeit your future. So on the basis of that, this document was compiled and assignments were shared, and that is what we have now at this last stage, which is the validation stage. Now, the policy framework itself, by way of explaining to us, for those who may not have the copies or for those who might not have gone through the copy, apart from the preliminary stages, this document has 8 chapters. As I listed here, Chapter 1, which is introduction. Chapter 2, overview of the policy life cycle. What does it take? What are the processes? And then Chapter 3, the types and sources of public policies, because there are different types of them in any country and within our country. And Chapter 4, of course, talks about the principles for effective public policy coordination and management. What are the things to be taken into consideration? Chapter 5 was about step-by-step guide. I think this is the real meat of the framework, where those who will be formulating policy, if this is adopted henceforth, we need to follow this step by step, and it will be possible for us to now say, have you done this before you bring out a policy? So step-by-step guide for each stage of the policy life cycle. And Chapter 6 talks about best practices and compliance. In other words, the world itself is interdependent. You cannot be an island to yourself at this stage of development. And if that is the case, we need to take a look at what is happening in other countries, what is happening in other places, since we cannot be on our own. And Chapter 7, of course, talks about documentation and record management. One of the things we discovered is that it is difficult for you to really find and make reference to documents as and when due. Sometimes you don't even know where they are, and sometimes you don't know who is keeping them. Sometimes even in an office, you have a situation where the documents are not there, but some have their own private copies. So this should not be the culture that we will encourage. And that's why you have that Chapter 7. And of course, the last chapter in the framework is Chapter 8, conclusion. I'm very sure that those who will be speaking after me will take on particularly the Chapter 5, which is the main context of what we are discussing. And they will take them one by each and explain them so that we can have our own inputs and make it work. And broadly speaking, when you look at this document, we were saying it's looks at three main areas. The first one is it has already helped us to take care of the types and sources of our public policies. So that for somebody who wants a background in understanding what public policy is all about, contextually within our Nigerian framework, the document has been able to take this on board. And then it talks about process of policy formulation and evaluation. That is from the beginning, conceiving to the evaluation and the review level. And of course, lastly, it talks about the imperatives of public policy coordination. Why is it a must for us at this point of our development? Why is it that we cannot afford to overlook this? And it is very important for us to understand this so that everybody will be on the same page in this our development process. And I think, let me quickly talk about what are the expectations that we should look forward to if and when this document is adopted and approved. We're expecting that it will help us to create a platform where everybody can compare notes. That is the first thing. Of course, it will help us in standardizing whatever we are doing so that we will not be doing staccato things and Mr. A will not be looking southwest and Mr. B is looking elsewhere. And we are expecting it to give us some level of uniformity. Uniformity in the sense, not in the sense that it will be word for word, of course, and I think that will be explained later, in the sense that we will have some semblance of trend which we can see through all our policies. And inclusivity is one other thing that we are expecting this to achieve when it is approved. And we're expecting that everybody that is stakeholder will participate. And that is why you have stakeholder engagement as well. If everybody is on board, as the saying goes that when people are not part of a decision, they are not likely to defend it. But when they are part of the decision, even if it is wrong, they will defend it. That's the assumption. So we want a situation where this document will encourage everybody to participate and all stakeholders will be engaged. And of course, as I said earlier on, we need to all constantly, consciously look at every step we take in our policy formulation from a systemic point of view. How is it impacting on the system? How many of the subsystems are we affecting? If agriculture is formulating a policy, how is it affecting education? We need to look at this, and it will help us to get that. Then it also encourages us to use the basic analytical tools so that we will not be working on assumptions. Sometimes we make our policies based on assumptions. And assumptions have two ways. It's either your assumption is correct or it is wrong. If it is correct, everybody will clap for you. If it is wrong, then you are in trouble. And that's why you have somersaults most of the time. And of course, we need to make them solution-oriented. We have talked enough about our problems in the country. We should be talking about solutions to our problems. In National Institutes, we say that let everybody move away from the book of lamentation and go to the book of revelation and action. So we want a data-driven, fact-based policy process that will take us to where we should be. And on that basis, I'll conclude by saying that we are hoping that this will be adopted by this gathering today and probably eventually approved by the authorities. And once that is done, we are also expecting that it will not just be on the shelf, it will be utilized. And of course, that will help us to standardize. And lastly, one of the banes of our development is communication. We have policies that are in the archives or in somebody's drawers. We shouldn't encourage this. And this document, of course, will make us go out of our shelves and make us to communicate our process and our policies appropriately. I thank you for listening to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that Professor Adeyanju deserves another round of applause. Indeed, we cannot afford policies that are confusing because one person is trying to do one thing and the other person is trying to do another, and then at the end of the day, they are drawing at different edges. Right. Is the room cold? Is the room cold? Ah. Okay. The nays have it. The years have it. Is the room cold? Ah. Okay, it seems this place is colder than this place. Abi? This place is cold. Okay. Please, if you are in charge, help us bring it down on this side. These people are fine. Abi? Okay, fantastic. Because it's about to get hot, actually. That's why I decided to ask first. The next speaker is someone who is extremely passionate about policy making and the life cycle of policies. She is a lawyer by training. She's a public policy expert. She's passionate about nation building and is one of those who's looking forward to a Nigeria that we can bequeath to our children and those yet unborn. She will be talking about the step-by-step guide for each stage of the policy life cycle. Section 1, agenda setting. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're feeling cold, she's going to make it hot. If you're feeling hot, she's going to make it cold. Put your hands together for Chineye Nwanaka.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols duly observed. It's afternoon already. Okay, sorry. It's afternoon. I want to start by saying a big thank you to Madam Hadiza. Thank you so much for being a willing reformer. Thank you for being a role model to us women, being an exemplary leader. Thank you for this opportunity to serve our nation and to contribute to nation building. I also want to thank the team that worked on this project. I know it's been very tiring, but it's worth it, and I'm so grateful that we're here today. And I want to thank all of you, our public sector leaders, our civil servants, our CSO leaders, change agents, think tanks. The work you do sometimes is thankless, but we all need to collaborate for nation building. So thank you for your time. My job here is very simple, but it's very important because I'm going to talk about agenda setting, which is the foundation, actually, of policy making and implementation. If you don't have the right foundation, how can you build? And so my slides, I don't know who has my slides, but yes, okay, it's here. I hope this works. Okay. Awesome. Before I go into my slides, I also want to commend SA for working on this process of making this a homegrown exercise. One of the first meetings I had with her, she mentioned that we have a lot of people who, these global consulting firms, I don't want to mention the names, and most times, our governments always feel like we have to bring those big names, global firms. But her idea was to actually domesticate this with NIPS, with our local think tanks, and come up with homegrown solutions to our homegrown problems. So I really must commend this exercise. So please, let's look at this document as a round of applause for her, please. And all of us, yes. So let's make this document our document. Let's have that sense of ownership. It's for our country. And so, as you can see here, This section focuses on agenda setting. It's a critical stage in policy management. This is the stage where you decide as a president or a governor or a minister what you prioritize. Most times you have so many conflicting issues. You have the media, you have protests, you have so many things. And most times resources are scarce. So what do you put on the agenda? Is it the group that makes the loudest noise? Or is it the business leaders who have the deep pockets? Is it the civil society groups who are, protesting? So this stage is when you have to really think about what are the national goals, what is the vision to be able to have a right foundation. Now, a very big part of agenda setting is inclusivity. A lot of the past speakers spoke about it. If you ask an average Nigerian, what is this policy or what is this document? Most times they don't know. They say, does it affect the price of Gary in the market? So most times the people who are creating policies for the end users are not captured in the process of our policy making. A lot of times it's very elitist. It happens at the top level. But then the people whose lives are going to be impacted are usually not carried along in the process. And so it's very important at that first stage to have the key stakeholders in the room. And these are examples of some of the stakeholders at the bottom of this page. You can see government agencies, the legislature, which was ably represented, because we know that policies give rise to laws. We have the media, we have civil society, we have private sector. Now, what is agenda setting? It's a process of identifying and prioritizing policy issues that require government's attention and action. It's a foundational stage in the policy-making process. And like I mentioned, this is where you identify, you prioritize, and you introduce these topics into public discourse for action. It helps to create consensus. Consensus is a key word because in a country as diverse as Nigeria, where you have different religions, ethnic groups, political affiliations, a lot of times we don't have consensus on issues, and so we're divided. It's like a house divided against itself. So for successful agenda setting, you need to lay that groundwork. Now, why do we need it? Like I said, we need to identify pressing problems, and in the next slide, I'm going to touch on the problems, because we have a lot of policy problems. And then when we talk about problems, I also want to bring in the point and ask this question: why do policies fail? Why is it that when people come into office, they have the best motives, intentions, they say they're going to eradicate poverty, create jobs, build schools, do this and do that, but after 4 years, nothing happens? Or maybe they just do a little bit, but at the end of the day, that policy has failed, even though it's a beautiful document. I'm also going to add to that another question: why do nations fail? Why do our citizens have to jack back to other countries where you have proper public service delivery? There's a nexus, and it has to do with having inclusive institutions. When your institution is more inclusive, and when you're able to build that state's capability, like what we're doing here, then you have a better policy-making process and implementation process. So let's not think of policy as something very abstract, like, oh, it doesn't affect me. No, it does. It affects the quality of our lives. It affects the decisions that we take on a daily basis. So, what are the key steps for agenda setting? The beautiful thing about this framework that we developed is that we are trying to make it very, very easy for anybody who picks up this document to be able to formulate policies, and implement policies, measure it, and all that, revise it when the need arises. So what are the key steps? It's simple. We put here constitute a policy development team. You can call it whatever you want, but basically you need a core team to work with. You don't want to do it alone. The second step is the vision. Like this current administration, we have the Renewed Hope agenda, different states, local governments, different tiers of governments have their vision, the goals that they want to accomplish. So you have to set the vision for the document. What does it seek to do? What is the mission? What are the goals? And then back to this problem identification I talked about, number 3. It's very, very important because most times you don't want to start with the solution in mind. You have to look at the problem to be able to deconstruct it and find entry points to that problem. Another thing is research, and I'm so happy we have think tanks here, we have leading thought leaders here. We need our policies to be, we're very detailed. In the past, there have been policies that have worked. You know, we have to research to see what has worked, what hasn't worked. We have to also look at some other things in other jurisdictions that we can learn from, not copy and paste, but learn from. We have to evaluate the existing policies, and then we have to engage stakeholders. We also have to identify policy options. In every policy-making process, there are winners and losers. Let's not kid ourselves. If you decide to, for instance, remove fuel subsidy, there will be some people who are fuel marketers who are going to complain. If you decide to do whatever you choose to do, there will be winners and losers. And so before you set an agenda, you have to identify who are the people that are going to be impacted by this policy and try to have at least a lot of them in the room so that they don't sabotage the process. But there will be definitely winners and losers. Next slide. So what are some of the best practices? I just want to check something. Okay. What are some of the best practices? Funny enough, I don't like the word best practice because this word also ties to something, a concept called isomorphic mimicry, which is basically this concept of going to another country, seeing that, okay, this works in Australia, China, and then you just take the whole thing, dump it without adapting it to our local context. So best practice for who? When people tell me best practice, I'm like, best practice for who? My context, it might work for you, but it might not work for me. But basically, the idea is, what makes this process effective? So I'll rather say that. So one is stakeholder engagement. We need to ensure as policymakers that every step of the way we involve the key stakeholders. We need to have town hall meetings, we need to have workshops, roundtables like this, to cross-pollinate ideas, to synthesize and ensure that whatever we're doing is in the best interest. We have to avoid something called this policy capture, when people just want that, maybe certain groups, interest groups, are, creating policies just for themselves and not for all the citizens or the people who are affected by it. The second step is data collection and analysis. This is something that I think we do have data sets in the country, but I think this is something we really need to invest in, to have a very robust data system and capacity building every step of the way. Why do we need data collection? Sometimes you see people, let's say a state, has scarce resources, and then you decide to use the little money to go and build an airport. And 30 minutes away in the next state, the airport's there. Maybe there's just 1 or 2 flights a day. Is that the priority of the citizens? The priority, maybe there might be women dying in childbirth, they don't have enough healthcare centers. Maybe that might be the priority. So if you have data, you can channel scarce resources to the people that actually need it. You won't go and build a power plant somewhere and it's a stranded asset when the people who need the power for productive use are somewhere else. So this is why you need to have data collection. Know the number of your citizens, know who will be impacted by the policy. It's very, very important. Also, number 3 says alignment with the national vision. If your national vision is to be the greatest country in Africa in the next 10 years or to become climate friendly, you need to ensure that your policies, your programs align with that and it's not going against what was the consensus. Now, number 4 is very important, which is transparency and accountability. And that's why we have a lot of think tanks here, CSOs, because, governance is improved by active citizenship. So we need a process that is transparent. If it's transparent, there's ownership. People feel like this thing you're doing is for us. And it enforces that social contract that our leaders have with our citizens. And so it also helps with, if a stakeholder is part of the agenda setting in the beginning, if something happens down the line during the formulation and implementation, they will say, wait, hold on, this is not what we decided. And so they will hold people accountable. Okay, this was budgeted for. What is happening now? And that makes the governance process, that makes our democracy stronger. So we need to ensure that there's open communication every step of the way. Another very, very key point of this is iteration, iterative learning and adaptation. please let no one deceive you. Policymaking is not straightforward. It's sometimes chaotic. It's not a linear process. It's not, if you do this, this will happen. Sometimes you start out, and then when you get into the field, you realize, wow, this is not what we anticipated. We thought we were going to reduce unemployment by 5 million. We've not moved the needle. So you need to remain flexible to be able to learn, adapt, and improve the process as time goes on. So you need to continuously monitor and take feedback. You don't have to wait till the end of your tenure in 4 years or 8 years. No. If you start year one, you see that there's a problem, you retrace your steps. You learn, you iterate, you adapt. And so this is one of the practical tools here. There are many others. But this is called, this is the PDIA, Problem-Driven Iterative Adaptation. And this is called the fishbone diagram. It's a tool that policy practitioners, entrepreneurs use to deconstruct problems. You know, I mentioned problems in the first 2 slides. Policymaking deals with very, very complex problems. It's not a problem that you just say, oh, if you do this, that will happen. No. And so to avoid the question that I asked you in the beginning, why do policies fail? A lot of policies fail because there's premature load bearing. You tackle a problem head on. I'm going to do 50 million this, that, and it cannot even happen. It's not possible. So you need to deconstruct it, find the root causes to your problems, and with those root causes, you then have entry points. Entry point is, what can we just start with as a ministry? That if we start with this, we gain momentum, we build trust with our stakeholders, and then we can do more. It improves the ownership, and then you learn while doing. And as you go through the guide, you see more about this, this policy tool. So some of the challenges we already know. We mentioned lack of stakeholder buying, consensus. People don't trust government, so most times when there's a policy, there's this suspicion, oh, what are they up to this time? You know. And then divergent stakeholder groups and interests. Also, we talked about data gaps as well. There are so many places, we don't even know basic, how many people are, the population, not to talk of, different data sets. Resource constraints is also a very big one. Most ministries, most MDAs struggle with resources, political interference, and, all sorts. And then this thing I mentioned, which is isomorphic mimicry. A lot of our leaders in Africa have outsourced their thinking. As much as we rely on support from other countries, we must have our own homegrown solutions like we're doing right now. So I think this is my last slide. Okay, oops. So real-world application. I'm sure there are so many examples of where there's been effective agenda setting, but I don't have the data. So, but there are 2 examples here, and I mean, it's just a question if we think it was properly done. But there's the Not Too Young to Run bill law that came about, and there was, why we put it here is because there was a lot of engagement. Everybody in the country knew that something like that was happening. There were town halls, there was a lot of youth engagement, lawmakers. I felt like it was a collaborative process. And then there's the National Social Investment Program. Anytime you do research on good policies and all that, this keeps coming up. Obviously, it's open to debate, but at least it's something that people knew, the country, everybody knows about it. It's not something that is hidden. And I think the process was relatively inclusive. So, yeah. So finally, what are the lessons learned? So, inclusivity, adaptability, alignment. We need to ensure that the whole process, we're not just thinking about the haves, but we're thinking about the have-nots. We also have to ensure that our policy-making process leads to inclusive growth. We don't want jobless growth. We don't want a GDP that just reflects at the top 10% or 5%. But the only way you can have inclusive growth is if you engage with stakeholders every step of the way because you're building for them. And you make it an iterative process. So, finally, the question I would leave you all with is, how can we ensure that our policymakers prioritize the needs and well-being of our citizens in their decision-making process? How do we ensure that they set the right agenda? Thank you all for listening.
Well, if you think she did a good job, thank you. I actually think she did a good job too. So I'm going to clap. Well done, well done. Well, policies may be beneficial to some, and it may cause some people pain. There is no such thing as a policy that there's no such thing about a policy that is one size fits all. Some people will feel different parts of it, but in the end, the greater good is what we must focus on, especially for our children and those yet unborn. If you do not have a copy of the policy document yet, please, you can pick it up to my right. Yes, you can pick it up from the gentleman who's standing there. He has quite a number of copies, and you can get one from him. That said, it is time for an interactive session. This is not a dump down where lecturers just come and talk. They say that a good lecturer is the one that when they're done talking, people have questions and they can interrogate what they have said. And of course, a good audience are those who have questions. So I believe there are questions, right? Are there questions? Amazing. Yes, this is a fantastic audience. The next interactive session will be handled by Mrs. Seun Ojo and Dr. Solomon Anjide. Mrs. Ojo is of the NESG. She is a lawyer by training. And Dr. Solomon Anjide is from the NIPSS. That is Nigerian Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies. Both of them will coordinate this interactive session on agenda setting. Yes. Thank you. Welcome, Doctor. So you have it on the slide? Yes. Okay. The last part of your slide. Of your slide? Yes. Okay. The one she just finished presenting. Okay. So the slide that was just presented has some questions at the end of it. If you do not mind, please can you put it on the screen? Thank you. Right.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Solomon Anjide. I'm here to take you through the interactive session. With me is my colleague, Mrs. Seun Ojo. She'll be here handy, taking notes and also intervene where possible. So, Professor Adeyanju has laid the foundation, the motivation for this session and for this exercise. And Chinenye has also taken us through a vital step in terms of agenda setting. And she discussed a number of things from step to step in agenda setting, best practices, problem-driven iteration, common challenges, experience in terms of setting agenda, and also lessons learned. So by and large, I know that you have a lot of questions to ask. Okay, you have a lot of questions to ask, and there are also some questions laid out so that they can also provoke your thoughts. Okay, so by and large, sorry, please display it.
Okay, so while we wait for the slide, okay, thank you. I think what we wanted to use this session for is to kind of validate the steps that Chine had outlined. So if our first question is, the outlined steps, are these clear? What are your thoughts? How practical do you think the steps are? So maybe if you could please go to the slide that has all the steps so that everybody can see. The steps are also indicated in the document that has been shared. So you can also flip through the document as you have it. Sorry, can you go to the slide that says key steps in agenda setting, please?
Slide 4.
Slide 4, please. Yes, thank you. The first step says to constitute policy development, a policy development team. While the second step says, which is the second step is the visioning and the strategic thinking. While the third step is problem identification. That's where Chine had shared examples of PDIA. On the fourth step is on research, while the fifth is to gather data, relevant data that you need for the policy, while the sixth is a data-driven decision making, and then the next step is to evaluate existing policies and plans within that space or that is relevant to the policy area. While the next step is stakeholder engagement and consensus building. And then after that, you have the identifying potential policy options before you then have, the last step, which is to analyze the policy solutions. So those are the steps. And if we could then have your comments, interventions on these steps that we've presented.
So, okay, that's fine.
Yes, thank you very much. My chair, I am Professor Babatunde Bolaji Bernard, the Senior Advisor Technical to Secretary of the Government of the Federation. I want to bring to mind to all of us to realize that this is one of those steps that are usually taken, and if we're shy to be part of it in details, then you would have credit to these people on the other side and the team that put this document together as geniuses, as people who are extremely intelligent that have done something you cannot correct. Our satisfaction when we leave here as people who worked on this document today is that you are able to find 1 or 2 or 3 or 1,000 problems with the document, and then you send us back to the drawing board so that we can know that Nigerians have differing opinion over what we have put together. So it is not the time, it's not a moment to be sober at all. It's not a moment, we don't want you to pat our back and say, you have done well with the document. We want you to look at the document because the first thing that was projected there, I have seen something wrong with it, probably intentional, hoping that someone from your side can be able to. But from all the presentations that have been made, on the layman's, on the man, the taxi man on the street, we have been making policies. We searched if there was a document that established a guide or a template for making policies in the country, we probably would have been reviewing and doing volume 2. But we didn't see, and so from all ramifications, we want Nigeria, beginning from here to when our children will take over, let them have a template. They can continue to review it. It's not a perfect document with human beings that put it together. They will continue to review it until someday they can even have a shorter document, but impactful on the society in terms of policy development, management, and communication. So we are relying on you. I know there are NGOs here, there are community-based organizations here, there are different policy experts amongst you all, and we're hoping that your contribution, your criticism, your constructive criticism will help us to better the document, and when the Federal Executive Council approves it, it will stand the test of time. So please join us to work on this document and bring the best out of it. No offense taken for anything at all that you bring on board with respect to this document. Please join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the motivation.
Thank you very much. My name is Olusegun Adekunle. I want to thank Professor Adeyanju, Chineye, and Chineye for their intervention. I want us to look at it from the point of view of the challenges that users can encounter in the process of formulating these policies and delivering them. And I want to start from, Prof, don't go. I pinpointed something in the Prof's presentation, which walks through Chineye's presentation as well, and that is making policies systemic, viewing it as systemic. And this is part of the problems that we usually encounter in different sectors. Let us wrap our minds around this and interrogate it. It will make whatever policies for as many sectors as are seated here to become more robust. But let me pick something out. We have the unique opportunity to have General Chai, in the room. And one of the few things that most of us would never think about is the emerging concept of civil-military relations in the process of formulating our policies. And we want Professor General Chai to please speak to it. This encompasses support of the military to civil authorities. This encompasses intervention in times of pandemic, intervention in humanitarian services, ensuring national security. And our role in all of this, national security, is not about the presence or activities of military alone, but in the concept of human security, which eases the pressure on the kinetic aspect of national security. But General Chai, if you can intervene, and let us interrogate this, you will find out that everything we are listing, problem solving, problem identification, interaction with stakeholders, allocation of resources, and making policies about people. Policies are about people, not any select group. So we will be able to understand essentially the type of work that we are expected to deliver here. Over to you, General, if you're ready.
All right, General.
I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but we have you in the room, and we would just love to share that concept that is becoming a global phenomenon, actually. Thank you.
All right, please pass the mic quickly. Sorry for putting you on the hot seat.
Thank you very much. I am Major General John Ochai, the Commandant of the Nigerian Defense Academy, a very unique institution, the only military university in Africa, one of the unique ones in the world. I want to thank most respectfully the Special Advisor to His Excellency, Hadiza Usman, for inviting me and for inviting my institution. Before I go ahead to talk about the issue of civil-military relations, I want to also comment on Chineye's presentation, where she talked about on the issue of international best practices. Yes, I agree with you. International best practices is not created by God, it's created by humans. And what standards do we call international best practices? However, I think the semblance of it exists in the form of benchmarking. And in this document, I've gone through it. I think benchmarking was not given a prominent attention. When we were growing up as kids, they used to say that if you don't go into someone else's house, you think your father is the richest person. When I was growing up as a kid, it was when I started going to my friends' homes that I knew that my parents were very poor. Because when you compare, you now realize there are a lot of things you can't have. So I think we need to, whatever policy we formulate, we need to benchmark with other countries. Even the developed world, they do that even aggressively. If you go to the UK or other European countries, for every major policy, they benchmark with other countries to see where they are. That enhances their capacity, in building their capacity. to confront the challenges that will come up along the way. Talking about civil-military relationship as relates to policies and as relates to national development, you've hit the nail on the head. Just yesterday, we were with the Minister of Defense in Jaji to commission a training program. And we're discussing, in most of these countries, when constructing roads, I'm just going to give a specific example. When constructing roads, they give consideration to military operations. About 2 years ago, I'm an army officer. I took my tanks to Kontagora for an exercise. And it was then we realized that some of those bridges were not classified to carry 60-ton tanks. For that single reason, we could not conduct a successful operation. We had to drop the 60-ton tanks and use the lighter tanks. You see, so if there was a critical requirement for us to employ those tanks, I won't be able to use them because there was no coordination between Federal Ministry of Works and the military to ensure that our roads and bridges are able to carry heavy tanks. That's just one little example. In the elements of national power, it used to be 4 in the classical sense, but today the elements have increased to about 7. The military is one of them, even when there were 4. The military plays a critical role in national development. A good example is the internet. It's the US military that used the internet, the way we call it today, is the US military that introduced it to the world when they started coordinating different computers to achieve desired goals. And today we have the internet. That's just one example. Military research contributes to national development. And we do a lot in our institutions. Currently, the Nigerian military has started collaboration with SHEDA. We are formulating a memorandum of understanding to ensure that their research develop our capacity. And we have a lot of research institutes. So if there is no military-civil cooperation, then most of these policies that will churn out, at the end of the day, will have some challenges in implementation. Because there is no element of any policy that will not have relevance with the military. And so for us to build our capacity as a nation, we need to take that as a key element of our policies and our development. The current security challenges we have in the Northeast, using that as an example, and in studying it, we came up with a lot of issues that have been resolved if we had an efficient civil-military cooperation or civil-military coordination. We've realized also that for us to resolve most of these security issues, it calls for a whole-of-society approach. You know, not just government now. The military, the government and its agencies, civil society groups, the media, the private sector. Even business individuals have a critical role to play in resolving some of these security challenges we are being confronted with.
All right, General, you may wish to round up your thought, please.
Thank you very much. In rounding up, I want to say here that though the Nigerian Defense Academy is here to take part in this discussion, but there's a need for us at Initio to have brought about the military dimension at the very beginning of this document. Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry, before then, just a quick question, General. You are talking about benchmarking. Do you have any country in mind? A quick question, please.
Yeah, in benchmarking, there are different aspects to it, to the benchmarking. One country, you may benchmark a particular issue with one country, and another, not one particular country fits in every way.
All right.
But to answer a question, the country called Indonesia in Southeast Asia is a very classical example of a country I want us to benchmark with.
Okay,
when they say Nigeria has over 300 ethnic groups, it was when I got to Indonesia, I realized they have over 700. Population-wise, we are almost at par, and they've been able to deal with the issue of diversity.
General, the point has been aptly noted. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So over to that side of the hall, please. Oh, sorry.
Yes, this is Professor Babatunde again. Thank you very much, General, for bringing up that. This is why we're saying that this document is a guide, it's a framework. If you look at the agenda setting, key steps involved in agenda setting. Or when you go down, you also see the key steps involved in the policy development and so on. In the document, there is provisions for that for you to benchmark. His benchmarking as a military personnel will be different from benchmarking of somebody who's talking about information, economics, technology, and so on and so forth. But then it's a document to provide the guide. So inside the document, what to do when you want to benchmark or compare the policy you're developing with other people, it's there. So thank you very much for that. It's very apt.
All right, thank you for the intervention, Prof. DG, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can we go to page 34, please? I think that is where we were taken to.
Yes, sir.
Now, detailed action and responsibility. Where we said, Honorable Minister of the Sector preparing the policy, what do we mean? We need to be careful in capturing this because when we send it to the ministries and agencies, they will be guided exactly by this. Page 34. Honorable Minister of the Sector preparing the policy. Who is the Minister of the Sector? Also, if we go to page 35, as the minimum, the team should consist of the chief executive officer of the sector, who may be the chairman of the team. I think we need to clearly state who is that chief executive, please, to ensure that we train people within the service to be able to drive that process. Page 36, a representative of the National Procurement Bureau. By the setting and the system that we drive of government now, every ministry, department, and agency have procurement officers posted by the Bureau of Public Procurement. Either they have director or deputy director, but they're officers responsible for that within the ministry, department, or agency. If we don't clarify this, they'll abandon the officers posted to the ministry, department, or agency and request BPP to send procurement officers to drive this process. Thank you.
All right, thank you, DG, sir. That is straight to the point. Go on, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols duly observed. My name is Dr. Anthony Adoge from the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. Thank you to the presenter. First of all, I want to say that in terms of the agenda setting, my colleague and I, we do agree with all that has been proposed for the agenda setting, including the use of fishbone analysis. But the question I want to ask is, this being a guide, is it possible for the guide to recommend proven forms of analysis, maybe just one or two problem analysis? Like the fishbone is a very good one. If we want to say that's what we want to use for our policies and strategies, I think that will help to ensure standardization. But permit me to take us back a bit, having listened to the reasons for this guide. Now, if you ask those of us in the ministry who are involved in policy development, we would say one of the big problems that we have up till now is the fact that there's no clear definition of who is to formulate policies. I'll give you an example. If a ministry like the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare develops a policy around immunization, for example, or around food nutrition, the next thing we'll see is an agency or a regulatory body also come up with policies. And we start asking ourselves, are you as an agency even supposed to develop policy? There's no clear-cut answer. We even went to the extent of looking into the mandates of some of the agencies. And you will see what came from the National Assembly is that some agencies and regulatory bodies can actually formulate policy, and that becomes a problem. Thank you very much.
All right. Well noted, sir. Any other comments, questions?
I have the mic over here. Can I proceed?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mine is by way of a comment and an advice. My names are Professor Joe Abugu, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. I am the Director of the Center for Business Law and Policy at the University of Lagos. I've had the opportunity of looking at this document. First, I commend the document as a step-by-step guide to ministries, MDAs, and agencies for the purposes of formulating policies to guide their activities. But from the presentation we've had this morning, the core problem and probably the need to justify the establishment of this committee and the work we're looking at today is the inconsistencies in policies emanating from different agencies. Now, for the purposes of achieving that, in my view, we need to approach it from two perspectives. One is what we are doing now, providing a guide to all the agencies so that when they formulate policies, at the end of the day, we can see some consistency, both in form and content, driven by the national agenda. That is one. The other side is to have an office where all of these policies are coordinated and they are teed off one after the other. Today, we have the Office of the Special Advisor to the President on Policy and Coordination. But as has been noted this morning, such an office had not existed before now. And so, there is no guarantee that that office will continue to exist. There's also no guarantee, and in fact, we don't pray for it, that Hadiza will continue to be in that office. She will certainly grow to bigger things for national service. So, I think part of this work should have a recommendation to institutionalize an office for national policy development and coordination. It is only when we have such an office headed by a technocrat, you know, the politicians and political appointments will come and go. But when there's such an office with a technocrat as the CEO or the director, then we can ensure that there will be consistency. And that office will then be charged with receiving all of these, you know, policy documents that have been formulated, you know, and then they can have an organogram where they cut them off, tee them off, have people who will look at them and see whether there are conflicts. And if there are conflicts, the relevant agencies, it's brought to their attention so that at the end of the day, there is a coherent framework for policy management in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Hello.
Okay.
I was going to use my campaign voice, but since I have a microphone, I'll just speak. I wanted to quickly respond to what was said by my colleague from Ministry of Health, is that within our policy guideline, the framework document, we should specify that sectoral policies need to have oversight by the sectoral minister. So an agency under, for example, a Ministry of Health should not conceptualize their policy in isolation of the supervising ministry. So every sectoral policy should sit within the oversight of the sectoral ministry, because the ministry and the minister would make the submission of your policy to the Federal Executive Council for approval. So I think we need to be clear on that. We need to find a place where we can reference the fact that all sectoral policies are to sit within sectoral clusters of ministries, and all sectoral policies are to culminate with the approval of the supervising ministry of that sector, so that there's clarity on that. People are not just going in different directions, which puts the onus on the sectoral ministry to ensure that there is overall policy coordination within that sector. Meaning that, for example, an agric, there needs to be clarity across the whole value chain and ecosystem in agriculture that recognizes the respective roles and attendant policies that will arise from that ministry. And I see an absence of that across sectors where ministers are not leading in that regard. Ministers are not holding meetings with their directors and their heads of agencies. These are things that should be done at least fortnightly. At minimum, every fortnight, you should do that. So having that sectoral oversight and sectoral supervision would enable you strengthen the implementation of policies that have been done and enable you have clarity as to how it's done. So please, within our rapporteurs, take note on the fact that we need to specify that sectoral policies are to have final oversight and approval by the sectoral ministry. The other aspect of it that was raised the need for it to have a permanent seat is what, in fact, we've discussed this in the last 6 months, meaning that policy oversight should sit within the office of the secretary to the government and should be oversighted by a permanent secretary, meaning it's a permanent position. So special advisors, the position is subject to what the president feels in terms of, do I need a special advisor on policy and coordination? Not every president may think he would require that. But what we need to do is, one of the permanent secretaries in the office of the SGF, we need to rename, in fact, we've got to the extent of identifying the PS role, to rename it to recognize that policy role so that you have a permanent secretary, policy, probably policy or coordination or policy and something that their day-to-day job is this issue of oversighting policies, ensuring that there's policy cohesion. So any policy document that is brought about by any ministry or any sector, you need to now submit it there so they can check whether there's a policy overlap or there's policy flip-flop. So yes, institutionalizing where the policy coordination sits beyond a special advisor is important, and these are one of the things that I would likely recommend arising from the work that we've done. So we've noted it as a big challenge because this document, when we started the work, I was actually shocked that we don't have it as a government. So if indeed there existed, for example, a permanent secretary office that oversights this, all these documents should sit there. That way you're easily able to put your hand on where it should be. So I think this is something we've discussed, and we must sort of wrap it up and include it amongst our recommendations. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for the clarification. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, really? Sorry, I grabbed
All right.
the microphone.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Okay.
Please, my question is actually the agenda setting section was very, very well articulated. But it has 9 steps, but the 5th step was what caught my attention. That is gather data. And from gathering data, you know that for effective policy formulation and implementation, we rely heavily on accurate data. And based on that, I want to find out if there are specific mechanisms or strategies that have been integrated into this framework to ensure systematic and continuous data collection at every stage of the policy life cycle. Then the second question also is, how can we strengthen the role of MDAs in collaborating with data institutions, such as MBS, to enhance evidence-based policy making? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Madam. If you look at the document well, Madam, thank you for the question. If you look at the document very well, under the section policy formulation and that of monitoring and evaluation, there is something like that.
Okay.
All right, we'll talk. One more intervention.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add a bit to what the essay talked about in terms of structuring the layers of responsibility regarding the policy framework. Now, at the national level, we always have a national policy. So, for example, in the agricultural sector, you have a national policy on agriculture. So rather than have sub-policies beneath the agencies under Ministry of Agriculture, what they should be focusing on actually is the strategy for implementing those policies. That's essentially how it will work. So you have the overarching policy in agriculture, you have specific strategies, because that would then feed into the annual budgeting process. I just wanted to add that.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, one more intervention, then. Yeah, we'll
many hands up. And please, I hope the questions are specific to the section in under review, which is agenda setting. We still have about, I think, 5 more to go. And so please, if you have issues relating to other sections around policy formulation, evaluation, and all of that, just hold it. We will come to that. But except yours is related to this, and please, you have 30 seconds and be straight to the point. Okay.
My observation is at page 35. Somebody has earlier raised it, but I believe there should be clarity in what we mean by that is under responsibility 35, the chief executive officer and the permanent secretary as vice chair.
I have said that.
A permanent if that chief executive officer is a head of an agency, then this document is dead on arrival, because no permanent secretary is allowed to queue behind a chief executive officer of an agency. In the civil service, I know. But if that chief executive officer is a minister of a ministry, of course, then it is better. But if you put chief executive officer to mean head of an agency, then of course it is dangerous, because it is often said that, of course, agencies of regulations must themselves be regulated. That chief executive officer will arrogate to himself a lot of power under the policy that will not be able to control him. So that is the issue there. That chief executive officer should be a minister who's supposed to be responsible for defining or definition or defending his policy, either at the Federal Executive Council level or at the National Assembly.
Thank you very much. I think that issue has been adequately addressed, and thanks for that contribution. Please, just to remind each and every one of us, if you have whatever comments that you're making, please note it down, because we will collate all of that, and once we go into the technical working group, we will, try to incorporate your thoughts into the final version.
Thank you. This is just a suggestion.
All right.
I have seen that on page 35, we have made suggestions on who will be making up the PTD. And I'm suggesting that we should add directors of reforms and service improvement. Yes, in addition to directors planning, research, and statistics, directors of reforms and service improvement should be in place, because most of these policies that are coming are reform issues that will be addressing service failures or service delivery failures within the public service. So Servicom and reforms that are in that department, I think they should be members of the PTD.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well noted, sir.
Thank you. Who's next?
Okay, sorry, he's coordinating.
Okay, can I make my comments?
Thank you very much. My name is Comrade Eche Asuzu. I represent the President of the Nigeria Labour Congress. I would just want to thank the organizers for inviting us for this meeting, and I want to say, given the time given to me, that the need for consultation, as already outlined in this document, is very important. And I just hope that that very important demand of a proper and effective policy formulation and frameworking has not already been violated, because you find out that when agenda like this are set, stakeholders like the labor, we are only invited to look at an already developed document. And in terms of setting the agenda, you hardly find some of these things, these stakeholders like us invited to actually look at this, some be part from the start. So I think it's something that government should consider. And also looking at the definition of policy as articulated in this document, talks about meeting the needs of society. The needs of society means the needs of human beings in the society. And a very core aspect of that is the workforce. So in forming policies in different spheres of national endeavor, I think is the message of the president of the NLC that we should factor in representation of the workforce, representation of trade unions in relevant policy circles, so that the needs of the human beings, which centers around the workforce, is taken care of. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is well noted. Madam, please go ahead. You have the microphone before you. All right, just a minute.
Hello, I have the microphone.
Okay, Director, please.
Thank you very much. It's just a clarification. I know in the process of policy development, there is an aspect we call a situation analysis. I don't know whether it has been captured in all the steps. And also the development of the zero drafts. I don't know, because there must be a zero draft before you call for stakeholders' engagement. So I don't know at what point in the process where they have been captured. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. At this point, I think as we go along, you'll get to see all of that.
Yeah.
Yes, you have.
Okay, thank you very much. I was going to say I will use my classroom voice. My name is Hawa Victoria Ibrahim. I'm a Deputy Director, Research and Innovation of Nasarawa State University. I was actually hold on with my recommendation on page 35 and 34, but I have heard a lot of people talk about 34 and 35. But I have it noted, just not to avoid repetition. I was going to suggest certain stakeholders, especially coming from the other colleague, what she had stated, National Bureau of Statistics, or Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. Can I suggest that can we consider including Nigerian Bureau of Statistics as a stakeholder? Is it also possible to actually identify the key stakeholders at this level, rather than leave it open that stakeholders can just come in? Again, academia. Maybe because I'm coming from the academia or from the academics, but I think that research cannot be taken without considering academic body. I know I'm sitting between professors, but then it is important to possibly include the academia as a major stakeholder among the 5 stakeholders. Thank you.
Noted. We have somebody from the legislature. Let's just hear before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Honorable Raphael. I'm a technical assistant in the office of the Speaker. Well, I think direct to the issue is that we're on steps involved in agenda setting. And here we've seen about 11 steps already. For us, we consider it too many, say to say. And we feel that step 4, with this on research, step 5, gather data, and step 6, almost similar. Because for you to gather data, you must do research. In the process of research, you gather data, you analyze the data, to maybe you move to the step 6. So if these 3 steps can be submerged into one, that would be good. I was going to ask a question, but the person that spoke from the Minister of Agric perspective tried to handle. And from our end, what we understand, first is this document. Who are those that it is meant for? Is it at this level? Try to get, but from our end, we know issues of policy, national policy, is decided at the top. What we expect the ministries and agencies is to generate, like what it says, strategies that are in tandem, that are aimed at achieving that national policy. So if that has been taken care of, the issue is those that are involved in national policies, are they in this room? Will this document also guide them? Because in the first step, I think you were sincere enough to note that the leadership sometimes decides to handle the agenda setting. So can we in this room set the agenda for the top, or the top sets the agenda, then we're expected to have a buy-in. So who are those that are going to implement this document? So I want to stop here. We'll take the other one in the next issue. Thank you.
So maybe the other part of the hall?
Pardon?
The other side of the hall.
I think we've spent much more than you've had.
Okay.
Let's save it
Okay,
so that we
that's
can move
fine.
on to the next section, please.
All right.
And please, if you have comments that is pertaining to agenda setting section of the framework, please note it down. And if it's so burning that you really want to speak to it, please, maybe when we get into the next session, you can take that opportunity to quickly say something.
Yeah.
Just raised regarding the right stakeholders being in the room, meaning that the ministers, I think you raised that, the ministers should be in the room. What we have here are the engine room of what constitutes the core of the ministry. We have the directors, planning, research, and statistics of every ministry, and they oversight policy formulation. So having the minister is the political head in terms of whether you come and go, but institutional structure of how the ministry runs sits with the civil servants and sits with the directorates of planning, research, and statistics in every ministry. Be that as it may, this document is going to Federal Executive Council, where the ministers are going to look at it as a document that they will contribute to. But the validation session on intellectual content that speaks to the owners in terms of the implementers on a day-to-day, also the people that conceptualize, people that do the work, actually sits on the public side, public sector side, with the directorates of planning research. One of the things that we've discussed with NIMS is what to do around creating a cadre on policy. What do we need to create a cadre on policy? Do we have our directorates of planning research and statistics having certification in policy? So these are the things that we look at. But recognizing political heads are the one thing, but the engine room of the people that get the work done are the other thing. So we have the different layers, and the ministers would get to comment on this when it gets to Federal Executive Council. But right now, it is the people that tick the dots, cross the T's, and dot the I's that are here to go through what is required in coming up with this framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for the clarification. So if you have further questions, comments, you can do well to send it to us. We'll be delighted to receive that. So at this juncture, let me invite Mrs. Sheung to round up by giving us the summary of what has been discussed.
Thank you. So from our interventions, first intervention was we need to look at this document from the perspective and challenges of the users of the document. The room also wanted us to flesh out the part around benchmarking of policies and also do justice to that part. There needs to be, we agreed there needs to be effective coordination amongst MDAs. The issue around responsibility, particularly around the policy development team, also was flagged, and representatives, we need to be more specific around representatives and who heads the team, and make sure it's in alignment with civil service, cadre, and also there was a suggestion to downplay emphasis on technical expertise, so that public servants and domicile the responsibility with public servants. Also, the room asks that the guide should recommend different types of analysis tools beyond what was presented. The room also agreed that we need to be clearer in the definition of who is to formulate policy, which Madam Essie has already addressed. and that is for policy making to sit within the responsibility of the oversight ministry for that sector, and the responsibility lies with the ministry or the minister to ensure that policies within their sector, one, they have oversight, cohesion, and coordination. Also, there was intervention around institutionalization of the coordination of policies, which Madam Essay has also addressed, which is currently that responsibility sits with the OSCF, but however, we might need to review one of the portfolio of one of the permanent secretaries who then takes that on as their mandates. That's policy development and coordination. In terms of data gathering, it was advised that we have NBS as a key stakeholder within the process, and not just requesting data, have them as a stakeholder. We also, on stakeholders, an intervention from NLC is to be robust in identifying all the stakeholders that need to be part of the process for both state and non-state actors. Also, there was a call to review the definition of policy. In the room as well, we wanted to include situation analysis and to indicate when this zero draft will be ready within the document. The last intervention was the steps 4, 5, and 6 of the document, to combine that into one step so that to kind of reduce the number of steps. So thank you very much.
Agree that the session was interactive. So, do you know what to do? You see? Very brilliant. Thank you very much, Ms. Uwalaka. Yes, I think that's it. Yes, Uwanaka Chineye. Yes. Please give them another round of applause. It takes a lot to get that to happen. And, of course, the conversation continues. This time around, it will be with Dr. Gabriel Ojegbile, who is going to look at policy formulation and adoption. You have about 15 minutes to do that, but a brief intro. Dr. Ojegbile is a policy and strategic advisor at the FCDO PEL-AC, which stands for Partnership to Engage, Reform, and Learn, and the AC is Accountable, Responsive, and Capable Government. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Ojegbile. 15 minutes, please, sir.
No, henceforth I'll be timing everybody. I'll be telling them their time. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Special Advisor to the President on Policy Coordination and Head of CDCU, the high table, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I thought it was not going to be projected, so it's now projected. Thank you. This session for 15 minutes is about policy formulation and adoption. I'm basically to give an overview of it. Because if you had read the document that you have, the draft that you have, sorry? Okay. Is it moving? It's not moving. But it's not moving. You have just tried it. Okay, so, excuse me. It's moving now. It has moved without. Okay. Is it working now? Okay. So I start with the introduction to policy formulation. And I start with the relevance of policy formulation in the policy management process. Now, public policy formulation, and it's been said since we started this morning by many people, public policy formulation is actually the core responsibility of government. Because the policy formulation provides a structured approach to addressing societal challenges and for operationalizing national priorities. This is the purpose of the public policy, and that is the main responsibility of government. Public policies are formulated to address specific problems that are faced by members of the public. And the public policy formulation is actually a critical component of the policy management process. The entire policy cycle, the formulation is so critical. It's so critical that in the sense that every other component of the policy cycle actually radiates around it. For example, if you do agenda setting, the purpose of agenda setting is to formulate the policy. And you cannot implement any policy without first of all formulating the policy. You cannot revise policy, you cannot evaluate. So everything more or less radiates policy formulation. So it's such a critical element of the policy management process. What are the objectives of this session, of the policy formulation? Basically, we try to do 4 things in the policy formulation stage. We try to outline the key activities that comprise policy formulation. And we'll come to that later. You will see that there are 20 of them. So we'll take each of the key steps. We discuss what each of them means, We also discuss the importance of each of these activities. What is its importance in the policy formulation process? And thirdly, we also then discuss how to go about executing that policy. Actually, the concept of step-by-step guide arose from that handholding in terms of what exactly you need to do to implement or to execute a particular activity. The second thing that we did there is to show the sequence by which all the activities that constitute policy formulation should be undertaken. And they should be undertaken in a certain sequence because the activities lead to each other. Activity number 2 we derive from activity number 1, activity number 3 we derive from activity number 2, and so on and so forth. So they are all linked, in sequential order like that. So we also outline the key role players in policy formulation. And this will include stakeholders. We'll talk more about that later. Then we outline the key factors to be considered when you are preparing a policy or formulating a policy. So who are the key stakeholders involved in the policy formulation? At the risk of oversimplification, we have tried to group the stakeholders into two main groups. The first group is the government agency that is preparing the policy. Every public policy is sector-based. Any public sector policy at all that you take is based in a certain sector. So the sector that is preparing a public policy is the members of that sector constitute this first set of stakeholders, and we call them internal stakeholders. Beyond the internal stakeholders, we then have the external stakeholders, and there are so many of these, depending upon the policy we are considering. So they will include CSO, for example, civil society organizations, communities, private sector organizations, development partners. The office, like the office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, is a key member of these external stakeholders, because that is the office that actually coordinates all policy issues in Nigeria. Sorry. Now, in terms of the key steps, as I said previously, the approach we are describing in that draft that you have comprises 20 main activities for formulating public policy. We have tried to group this. If you have the document with you, you can then go to that area now and see those documents and see the activities. 1, 2, 3, 4, they are 20. They are also listed in Annex 3. If you look at Annex 3, those activities are also listed in the sequential order in which they should be undertaken. And if you look at Annex 4 also, Annex 4 presents a kind of best practice table of content, which the policymakers can adopt or adapt in the process of preparing their policy. So, but for purposes of being able to track and review the policy formulation as you go along, we have tried to break the 20 activities down into 3 phases. Phase 1 is what we call the pre-technical session phase. And this phase comprises 5 main activities. 5 main activities. The first activity is constituting the policy formulation team. Second one is training that team, and so on. And that phase ends with what we call review of high-level policy document. The review of high-level policy document is very important because no public policy is made in a vacuum. They are made in relation to a certain problem and in relation to policies that already exist. So we need to review high-level policy documents to be able to ensure proper alignment of a particular policy we are developing with existing policies, so that, as we have heard since this process began in the morning, so that there will not be contradictions among the policies, there will not be counter proposals, and so on and so forth. So the policies will be well aligned. Now, the second phase is the technical session phase. Any public sector policy that you want to prepare, you have to hold a technical session where some key issues of direction will be discussed, agreed. So you start with things like the vision, mission, and core values to evaluate those ones, to make sure that they are fit for purpose. You then move from there to develop the objective, from there to develop the programs, to develop the expected outcome, and things like that. So those kind of things will be settled at the technical session. And there are 6 main activities on this phase. Then the final phase is phase 3, which is the post-technical session phase, which comprises 9 main activities. The first activity is actually to complete all the activities that you could not complete at the technical session. Because no matter how many days you devote to your technical session, the technical sessions are usually between 3 and 5 days. Even if you put 5 days, you will still not be able to finish most of the things that you were supposed to do at that session. So the first activity that you do after the technical session is actually to complete what you could not complete at the technical session. Then you then go on to do the costing, to cost the policy. You want to cost the policy so that the policy makers will be able to have an idea of how much it will cost them to implement that policy. And there are a whole lot of other things. Then you do the documentation to produce what I think the director was calling zero draft and so on. So you produce that one, you take that draft through the quality assurance process, through approval, and so on and so forth. So these are the three main phases of the policy formulation, which, like I said, comprise the 20 main activities that make up the policy formulation process. Now, breaking the policy preparation process down into these phases is very helpful for progress review of the public policy preparation process. So as you are preparing the policy, as you finish one phase, you'll be able to sit back and look and say, okay, have we done what we were supposed to do here? Have we done what we were supposed to do here? Before you move on to the next phase. Sorry. Okay, so best practices and challenges. The best practice, what makes this process, this particular approach that we're describing, what makes it attractive as a best practice? One is that the policy formulation process is systematic and sequential. By the time you read the draft document, you will see how those activities how they flow from each other and how one reinforces the other. So it's so systematic. You really cannot get a good public policy prepared if you miss any of those steps that are listed there. Then the second is the emphasis on stakeholder engagement. By the time you read the document, you will see how much emphasis has been placed on stakeholders' engagement. And this is because without stakeholder engagement, the public policy may not be too relevant to the stakeholders. Don't forget that the public policy is made to solve problems that are facing the stakeholders. And so, therefore, it should be relevant to them. So, emphasis on stakeholder engagement or stakeholders' involvement makes policy proposals to be relevant to stakeholders' needs. Then the third one is emphasis on gender and social inclusion. So there is also emphasis on gender and social inclusion, which is called GESI, which makes public policy equitable. So, and the fourth is that the process or approach has been successfully applied to state government, to government policies at federal level and at subnational level in Nigeria successfully. So these are some of the best practices attractions of this approach that we are recommending here. What are the common challenges? Issues that may arise in the stage of policy formulation. The first one, which I think has been repeated over and over here today, is the issue of the data scarcity. Now, data is so central to policy formulation. It's central to policy formulation. So in fact, it's not only policy formulation, but all other aspects of the policy cycle. But more importantly for policy formulation. Because without data, it will be difficult to make the policy evidence-based, So you want to set the baseline, for example, you require data. You want to do any other analysis, you require data on all those ones. So data shortage. I didn't want to say shortage or total non-availability of required technical expertise, but that the technical expertise for policy development, public policy development, needs improvement. At least that's the experience that we have seen in the field by working with public sector. There may also be wrongly focused policy objectives. So this will also be related to the issue of the shortage of technical expertise that we talked about. Then finally, non-participation of relevant stakeholders in the policy formulation. This is one key challenge that has been highlighted in the literature for public policy making in Nigeria in particular, that we just sit down in our respective offices and prepare policies, without much involvement of the stakeholders. This may be as a result of budget constraint, for example, because to involve the stakeholders in the policy formulation requires money. It requires money, it requires expenditure, which the sector that is preparing the policy may not have. So, but it's a key challenge that needs to be addressed. So what are the possible solutions to this? In terms of the data solution, we've said that the main solution is to institutionalize effective data collection, data management. Data collection, data storage, data dissemination as part of governance. I mean, there's no shortcut to this. We need to just collect data. We need to store the data properly. We need to disseminate the data properly. And this is where I think the Department of Planning, Research, and Statistics in the respective MDAs have very great work to do. Most of the data that is required for public sector work, they are administrative data. Many of them are administrative data. They are the data that we actually generate ourselves in the public sector. So the only problem is that we don't collect those data. So we should then make it an habit to be collecting those data regularly, systematically, be storing them, and then be disseminating them whenever we need them. So that is very important. So on the issue of the technical expertise, we suggest here that if there is any gap in the technical expertise for preparing the policies, we may want to hire technical experts, consultants to support us. But I use the word support consciously. I didn't say, yes, go and bring a technical expert to come and prepare the policy for you. No, you will prepare the policy. You will do everything that needs to be done in terms of step by step. But the technical expert will support the process. It will also train, it will also give tutoring and so on, and transfer some of the skill that he or she has and so on. Then the policy objectives to be based on result of the needs assessment. So we need to do needs assessment from the stakeholders so that our policy objectives can be relevant to what the stakeholders want. So then we need to ensure full participation of stakeholders in all stages of public policy formulation. I think this is the final thing. And also, no. So in terms of real-world application, how has this process applied in Nigerian governance framework? The public policy formulation approach described here has been applied successfully by both at the federal and sub-national levels. And we just cited a few examples here. There are many other examples. For example, the National Development Plan of 2021-2025 went through that process. The Nigerian Economic Empowerment Development Strategy, the needs and so on, also went through it. What are the key lessons that we have learned in applying this process? One, the thing is that the policy development team that is usually constituted in the public sector tend to need hand-holding in doing the policy. And this may be as a result of the shortage of the technical work that we said before. But as you hold their hands and they do it first time, second time, they will be able to continue to do it on their own. So senior officers and decision makers need to be fully sensitized to get their buy-in, And then creativity is required in handling data scarcity. We cannot say because data is scarce, therefore we will not prepare policy. When we were in school, in the universities, for example, during our undergraduate days, there is a book that we read, written by Professor Arthur Lewis, which is titled Planning Without Data. When you read that book, it will tell you how you can do a plan without data. So planning without data. So we cannot say because there is data shortage, we will not do policy. We only need to be very creative. So thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Well done, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Gabriel Ojegbile. Indeed, we need to also commend this gathering, especially because most of what is being discussed is localized, support from without, but of course, the policies from within, and that is quite commendable. Please put your hands together once again for Dr. Ojegbile. Thank you. So, next up is an interactive session. We need to keep to time this time around. And we would have 30 minutes for this session. It is an interactive session on policy formulation and adoption. And it will be handled by a veteran who has been in this space for 25 years and counting. He holds a PhD in leadership, governance, and strategic studies. He is trusted across Africa. I mean, Ghana, Uganda, South Africa, as an advisor and a leader in policy, in public policy, strategy, partnership, management, intergovernmental relations, communications, performance management, and delivery. He currently serves as the federal team lead at the FCDO PACE, which actually stands for Partnership for Agile Governance and Climate Management. He has experience from both the public and the private sector across nations. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Umar J. Abu. You have 30 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Kem. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've been trying to moderate and ensure that we keep to time. And so it's my turn, and I will ensure that I also manage myself. A number of the issues that have been raised somewhat speaks to the presentation that Dr. Gab, and that's what we call him, has presented to us. So we'll go straight to the points. And please, I will advise and also seek your support so that we keep to time. Whatever issues that you have, it's expected that a number of us would have taken time to read through the document. And let's restrict ourselves to questions, comments, observations as it relates to the section on policy formulation. And so I think the floor is open at this point. If you have any concerns, please raise up your hands and we'll bring the microphone to you. I see Dr. Tayo has his hands up. Please pass the microphone. There's another one there. Just to also say, probably before the microphone gets to Dr. Tayo, that if particularly those who had raised up and, I see you, who had raised some questions or those who couldn't, please, there's a lady there, Ibukun, please could you stand? You could pass those questions that you have or the observations that you have written down across to her or email them to Aisha as well. I think the email that was supplied in the letter that was written to you so that we can collate that and incorporate it into the final document. So Dr. Tayo, you have the floor, sir. The microphone, is it working? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for a great presentation. I think the first thing is to note, and this is just a general note, that the level of detail in this document is on purpose. You know, that shortening 20 steps to 2 steps is a lot of time we presume everybody's an expert. That this guide is supposed to ensure that if you are not an expert and you suddenly took on this role and you had to lead this process at a technical level, you can catch up. And so it's very important. And so I want to commend the level of detail. Very important to note that the detail is on purpose. It's also to note that policy communications is a cross-cutting component of this entire document. And we might want to think about the policy development team as needing its policy communicator every step of the way. One of the dangers of policy writing groups, and NESG has 35 policy working groups. We are currently with colleagues in the room writing 17 policies across government. It's very easy for us to get into our insular writing, forget that especially in the formulation stage, that the formulation stage itself is a communications process. So it's just to highlight it. One, maybe the way to solve the problem is to make sure that the team has a policy communications, who could be director comms in the ministry, that guarantees that every stage is properly communicated. I think that solves the problem. The second is that same communicator solves the problem of stakeholder consultations, which is also part of every phase of the process. So those will be my two broad comments. I won't say them again.
All right.
The last is with regards to this process itself, that a lot of times the policy formulation process, the templating matters, and I didn't hear my brother point to the fact that if you go to the checklists behind, we actually attempted, I don't know whether it's in this draft, we attempted to insert a template for the policy formulation. What I think Madam was calling the zero draft. What should it look like? Because it needs to be standardized across government. So that's something that I think we should note, that everybody should pay attention to. The templating of the zero draft should look the same across government if we follow these steps. And I think we should highlight it in the policy formulation process so that once the templates are approved, you know, if SAP sees 20 drafts, she knows they will have 10 sections. If you're looking for the cost analysis, you know where it will be. And then we can move government coherently as we go on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
I would like to reference to an issue that I think a lot of us have observed in terms of what a policy document should read like. Some of the policy documents read like guidelines, some read like strategy documents. So I think we need to have maybe a paragraph that explains what a policy is. Because you read a policy document, you can see clearly it's a strategy. You can see a policy document, you can see maybe it's a guideline. So I think we must have some definitions which says a policy is like this, a strategy is a document that comes below a policy for implementation purpose, and then so we need to find somewhere where we sit that within this document to provide that clarity. That way you have a semblance of uniformity in terms of how a policy should read and what language should be in a policy. Because policies are not things that you review every other year. But guidelines and strategies are things that you amend. Policies are larger documents that speak to your sectoral trust around an area. So this is something that I wanted to raise. In addition, I was just discussing here about the need to recognize internal policy documents. For example, an organization having a human resource policy. So we must recognize such need of internal policy documents and also the process for conceptualizing such policies and also the threshold, the approval threshold, meaning that such policy culminates with the board of the organization approving your HR policy. So the HR policy is the one that comes to my mind immediately, but there may likely be other, would I say domestic policies or internal policies to organizations that are not larger sectoral policies. So let's not lose sight of that as well. So when you say HR policy, we explain, you know, the process of doing that. This is an example, and also the relevant circulars and documents that are that would guide such policy formulation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Yeah, two hands here. Since the lady says, there's a lady, she just spoke. Can you give to Dr. Adogo? And then the man after him, then the lady after. Then we'll come this way.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Anthony again. Thank you, Prof, for the presentation. 21 steps, policy formulation, and just have a request based on the challenges we've been having. I'm sure most people will know that the health sector, we are well resourced. We are well versed in policy formulation. However, part of the challenges we have is the fact that after engaging all the stakeholders and having a launch of the policies, dissemination and archiving becomes a problem. And so you get to see, by the time you share the policies to the governors and other very high up there stakeholders, the people who need to implement do not have access to it. So even nowadays that we put up on our websites is still a problem. So I would plead or request that we add, since this is a guide, that we need to, for all MDAs, that we need to properly archive our policy documents. For example, the coordination office at the SGF can have a policy bank where everybody goes. So you know if you go there, you are going to find it. That's one. Number two, like I said before, it's policy dissemination. How widely should this go? What channels should it follow? This guide would help to specify, maybe as step number 22, before we come to archiving. This is how it should be disseminated, and these are the proven channels. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The name is Dr. Angus Ikpe. I'm the head policy and planning for the Federal Ministry of Health. Well, this particular stage of policy development is the most critical.
Absolutely.
Policy formulation and adoption. And we often ask, why do policies fail? I didn't speak in the first section because the agenda is really not the problem. We usually know the issues. In the health sector, in the health space, it's been health for all. By the year 2000, now we say, universal health coverage 2030. We always know what we want. But the problem is in translating from the issues to the policy response. And here, I see, we need to be as simple as possible because that's one of the problems that's also affecting our ability to deliver on some of these things. When you need to go to school to be able to do your work as an administrator in civil service, it's a problem. You need to be trained and overtrained. We do a lot of planning in the health sector. Every time we train, we try to upskill, but we still have problems, people understanding the basic tools that we use. I think we need to make this process a lot simpler. For instance, I am seeing where we have programs from objectives. We talk about the programs, we talk about outcomes, and we now come back to broad objectives. A lot of these terminologies are a bit confusing.
Please,
can
you refer to the relevant section so that...
Under policy formulation, you have the steps there include, you have the objectives, then you specify programs, and then you specify programs and you say outcomes, and before you go to broad objectives. What's the difference between broad objectives and programs? I think we should simplify them as much as possible. Two clear things there, and that is what also affects or determines what we see in our documents. Between objectives and strategies, a lot of it is what we understand. The objective is what you want to achieve. The strategy is the how. And we see documents that go from the beginning of the mission all the way to the end. And what you call the intervention or strategy is still an objective statement. It hasn't specified how. And when you don't specify how, you can't even cost it. You cannot just cost an objective without knowing what approach you will take, which will help you to identify the resource requirements. So, and in this whole process, like I said, the most critical phase is this phase, and something is missing, or rather, there isn't enough emphasis on decision-making from amongst policy options. First of all, arriving at those policy responses the options you have from the objectives you want to achieve, there is that phase of policy analysis that requires a lot of, discussions and, looking at things to know what will likely work. The issue of evidence, the issue of political acceptability, social acceptability, cost, sustainability, equity issues, all of these things that need to be discussed. This is the point where policy fails, because how we go about it, this is how we make decisions on what will not work. We make decisions to do what is proven not to work. We have been seeing it not working, and we're repeating them.
If I may come in there.
Yes,
the
please.
comments you're making is informed by experience. Are you then saying that what you have before you in that document does not try to address that?
There needs to be more elaboration on the policy analysis. Very key, most critical aspects. This is what makes our policies fail. The decision made at the end of the day, beginning with first, the options, the evidence behind those options. For instance, if you're not the ultimate policy decision maker, you would want to be making recommendations, maybe as a team, you're advising.
Yep.
And you will put forward 1, 2, 3 options, evidence backing each of them, all other factors that, promote or make it likely that you will choose those, and then you leave it for the ultimate policy decision maker to look at all those criteria and maybe with your scoring or your assessment, and then be able to finally make the decision. That aspect, how we arrive at our decisions, sometimes no decision is made. When I said there are no interventions determined, we're still saying strengthen this, do this, but where is the how? When we don't specify, and that how is the strategy, really. And if you don't specify, you can't even cost it. So it's for us to just be very clear about that. The issue of whether we're dealing with policies, plans, I don't want to go into that discussion here, but they are almost all, this is just at the strategic level decision making. And then once you're able to say how you will accomplish an objective and truly, achieve what you intend to, the outcomes that you want, that is when you will say you have finished planning or you have finished making your policy decisions.
Thank you.
Very important there that we emphasize on the policy analysis phase, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Busola Ajibola, and I work for the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development. I quickly just want to draw our observation to, I think, page 35, where reference was made about formulating the policy development team. And I think there's a part there that just vaguely says something like selected stakeholders or relevant stakeholders, something like that. And I just wanted to recommend that we probably should attempt to, define mandatory stakeholders that should be part of that PDT. I think we can easily identify those demography of stakeholders that are usually always marginalized in policymaking cycles, even from the onset. And I wanted to emphasize that I think mapping that correctly can, easily help with problem identification, and I think it can also help with policy communication. So there's a way mapping that relevant stakeholder can help in, I'm trying to find, sorry? Basic minimum, yes. And then I think it can also drive a process where policies are embraced, in an homegrown manner, such that you don't then have to start forcing them on individuals. I like that Dr. Adeloju already pointed out a need to, capture policy communication again. And I don't know whether there's been attempt to capture the role of reputable media in that. I also think that's something that we should try to capture. And those are just for now. Oh, yeah, the last one is, so we talk about data, and I see how we have emphasized over and over how data collection is a problem. But I think beyond data collection, struggle is also data harmonization. So far, how have we done with harmonizing data for policy formulation? So we don't have one agency or ministry using some separate data, and then, so we need to find a way to harmonize the data that would be guiding our policy formulation processes, as well as ensuring that while we're thinking of institutionalizing the policy management, you need to be, managed by a specific permanent secretary. We are also putting the obligation of a policy domain within the custody of that policy management unit. So before any policy is made, you can always go to that domain, and then it informs your policy making process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. I think we need to move this way, but I see the essay has something to say, then Prof. Or essay, do you want to wait for Prof first because he had his hand up? Accept it. No, not Babatunde. Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think most of these comments are good for the input. Only that we need to make a few clarifications. The person that spoke before the last, at a point when you talked about agenda setting has not been a problem. I discovered that the point you were trying to emphasize actually belongs to that agenda setting, which you say is not a problem.
Correct.
And aside that, there are analytical tools that actually are supposed to be used, which I think are embedded here. But your point is clear that probably there should be more emphasis on it, and I think that is just the point. So the issue of stakeholders, when you say relevant stakeholders, because this is a guide actually, it's a framework. It's not exhaustive. It is to give guidelines and direction. So if you say that stakeholders are at different levels, you have the core stakeholders, which you must identify before you even talk about engagement. And you have multiplier stakeholders, those who your decisions are going to be affecting. They are also stakeholders, but they are not having the same level of interest in the policy. And of course, you have those who are opinion leaders along the line of those who create public opinion, media, NGOs, and others. So all this, I think, are the things that those who are going to be using this document, we have to identify. Because you cannot, within this document, identify those ones and be exhaustive. In fact, it can be misleading sometimes. That's why you need to leave it a bit open, so that some level of flexibility will be there for implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to quickly provide some clarity and the need for us to recognize a core component of where we have policy contradictions would speak to the need to recognize in the process of policy formulation, there's a need to look at historic policies in that area. So I think we must put a line that, I don't know if it's there, that recognizes that there's a review of historic policies in that particular area. That way you are not going backwards in certain areas, and also sectoral policies that have attendant linkage or effect. So in doing policy conceptualization and formulation, you need to recognize other sectors that would have an attendant impact by that policy. You need to relate and find out what your new policy would impact on. So I don't know if it's there. Is it there? Yes. Okay, good. So it's there. And then the other aspect that you spoke to about, this is a framework that guides how policies are developed. So when you look at the core sector, for example, a policy in agric, this would not speak to why Ministry of Agric will choose to use this type of policy as opposed to that type of policy. That content of what the policy is specific to that sector. What this document seeks to do is to guide you on the process of conceptualizing the policy. But the content or sectoral content as to the government going backwards and forward on the sectoral policy is not contained within this. It's something that should be recognized in policy analysis, as you mentioned, but this policy framework cannot speak to why or how you are unable to move through with your own policy, or why new ministers keep coming up with different ideas. Oh, healthcare, we're doing this, and then 1 year later, another person comes up with another policy. So this framework is really a guide, a framework of how policies should be, but the content of what would be contained in an agri policy that speaks to maybe a livestock policy is not within what we speak to address here. The other area is, I was saying, Uzoma, maybe we're going to steal you from health, because a lot of what you said are things that we have talked about, and we're planning to do a repository for health, a repository of policies where you're able to see, in the last 20 years, we've had X number trade policies, and this is what they speak to, and you're quickly able to lay your hands on it and digest it, and for research purpose or for whatever work. So that is something that we're keen to have, and we have discussed it, and we're going to look at it. And the comment on mandatory stakeholders are also things that we would look at to recognize who are the general stakeholders that need to sit across every type of stakeholder engagement. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks. We're supposed to go this way. We'll come back to you, Dr. Tayo, except it's it's a burning issue. Yes, it is. Okay, please, go ahead. Sorry.
Please, it's just a correction to my brother, please. One, I totally agree with you on page 51. We should adjust that clause on broad strategies. It's sitting out of place, so you're totally right. Everything you discussed on policy analysis, in global best practice, it sits under agenda setting. So if you go to page 41, you extensively exhaust existing policy analysis, all the historic fails and successes. Then if you go to page 43, we then jump into policy options, the point you were making. What options and why? Then what strategies? Then if you then go to page 44, and actually then page 45, you then go out on building consensus on the strategy. So my sister, where you discuss stakeholder, you see that there's an extensive process there. A communication plan, a stakeholder mapping of which stakeholders you must now have consensus on the strategy. So that step one delivers a policy agenda document. Step one. That policy agenda document becomes the instrument of the policy development team. All these debates on which option, you've resolved it in the agenda setting. All this argument of the stakeholders, you've resolved what stakeholders should be part of the team. That document then becomes their guide. I know many of us have not had time to do some deep reading, but it's there in step one. And that allows the policy team to go forward with the debates of the past, with the issues or strategies that worked and did not work, into this formulation process. So please, it may be a bit different from how we have done it, but please take a look, and that's what I think the point Umar was asking. If we do it like this, will it fail? You know, but you can see how we've added your thoughts to it, but it sits under agenda setting. Please, just to highlight that point.
Thank you, Dr. T. So we're going this way now. There's a lady there who has had her hands up from the onset. This way, please. Who's there?
I have mic, so should I go ahead?
Who's that? No, there's a lady. Please, before Doc. Okay, please pass the microphone to her. Before you. We'll come back to you, sorry.
Thank you very much. I am Dr. Zainab Pisagi, the Director of Planning, Research and Statistics from the Ministry of Arts, Culture, Tourism and Creative Economy. I just want to interject with respect to the issues of action and responsibility column. We all know that policy development and management is all about solving problems. Let us not end up finding problems after we develop the framework. Why am I saying this? We all know about conflict of mandates generally running across MDAs, where you see some programs, some activities, or some policies cutting across different organizations. So I don't know, in the framework, since it's going to be the guide for us to implement whatever policies we would have in place in future, would we find a place where mandates are clearly defined so that at the point of implementation, there won't be issues of you are doing my job, I am doing your job. Then again, throughout the presentations I've watched so far, I've not seen where the budget, the people making budgets for policies, programs, and projects, and are being made to be part of these processes right from the formulation stage of these policies, because they have to be aware of the policies. Then when it comes to implementation, which obviously we all know that resources will be required, we should, so I think in each of the responsibility column, all these key stakeholders, like previous speakers have spoken, should be keyed into it so that there won't be conflict in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe Dr. Tayo's response then addresses that. If you go back, you will, at the stage of agenda setting and then going through that mapping that will be done, you will definitely identify those that you think are critical to the process going forward. Can we give to the gentleman there, and then we come to the lady?
All right, thank you very much, Doctor. My name is Abdulaziz Abdulmalik Husseini. I'm with Connected Development, a civil society organization. I had some submissions regarding the agenda in the first instance, especially as it relates to the sequencing of the activities or the steps there. But I would think, coming from a program's perspective, I would think that I'll first identify a problem before I begin to put up a team that I feel is qualified to address that problem. So again, I would want to say we might want to look at the sequencing of that agenda setting again. Okay. Moving on to the policy formulation, I think it will be very important for us to also have a communications plan, especially as it relates to our engagement with stakeholders. I hear somebody mention critical stakeholders. As far as we are concerned in engagement with everybody, even in policy, every stakeholder is critical. There are those stakeholders that you need to keep informed. There are the stakeholders that you need to consult. Those people that you need to keep informed sometimes can make or mar your policy. So there's that need for us to identify them as well as keep the necessary policy communication plan in place to be able to manage these people. Next is in the area of training and capacity building for those who are going to be involved in the policy development team. Sometimes it's not about training or capacity building. Sometimes it's culture swallowing the policies or the processes. These people are so much involved in a particular process that they are so used to that when you come up with a new process entirely, you know that thing with I'm not the civil servant, general of the federation, or God leave that in. Yes, no be Mickey Mongo Park. Keep that in aside. Let's do it the old way. All this in a paperwork. So I think there's that need for us to also shift away from those culture that are actually affecting our own drive or aspiration for change. Otherwise, we'll do the same thing. We still have those critical stakeholders within the organization that still have this mindset and will continue to mar whatever we bring and put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No doubt about it. I have 56 seconds to go by my time.
It's when it's coming to my turn that is 56 minutes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, just to avoid repetition, I think I will see Dr. Dio later to tell me the page where there is stakeholder mapping. Because it seems like we are saying the same thing. We need to identify in the whole policy circle which stakeholder is involved at doing what. And I'm yet to find the mapping in this document. I believe we just want to make the document a better one to ensure that we carry the right policies to the field of programs. So because I was going to suggest the stakeholder mapping. However, I just want to take it up from one of the suggestions about analysis, policy analysis. I think the reason maybe why you raise policy analysis beyond the agenda setting is because there have been a lot of people mentioning data. You don't use data to make policies. It's the analysis and the outcome, I believe they agree with me, is after you analyze the data that you collected from the field, the result that is used to make policies that influence programs. So this is where, again, the stakeholder mapping is very important. Who owns data and who analyzes data? And again, I will advocate for researchers. Thank God we have a number of professors here. So it's important for us to still look at our stakeholder mapping and possibly develop on it and work more on it. And then to understand that this data we are talking about, we can't use it raw to make policies, except it's being analyzed, except it's used to answer certain questions that is raised at the objectives, when objectives are set. So the questions influence the research and guides the area of the research where data is being utilized. And I wanted to follow up from Prof, and luckily enough, I'm sitting beside him, so I'll attend his class later. But then he identified financial constraint, which is quite important at the formulation of policies. And but what I didn't hear is the mitigation strategies. One of our health consultants or experts there also mentioned implementation risk, where he suggested archive and policy bank as mitigation strategies. It's important to also consider political instability as a major risk in formulating policy. I noticed in the agenda setting, I was quiet about it because in the agenda setting, I read the part of PEA, that's political economic analysis, which is quite important, where interest is identified at that stage. But even at the formulation stage, we can't take out that interest because of continuity. So let's also look at that as a risk and come up with strategies to mitigate that. That's it for now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the final take from DG BPSR, and then we'll call it a day. Okay. Can you pass the microphone?
I want to respond to 3 of the comments. The first one is from Doctor, from Ministry of Culture. I think issues of budgeting and the finances that will be required for policies have been mentioned around that. And it is left for the ministry or the agency, if they don't have funds, let them not create or develop policies. Beyond that, the issue of who owns a policy. We are running whole of government, and cycles within the public service are being destroyed. So very soon, we may have ministries, agencies in name, but we'll be operating through one centralized system, whether we like it or we don't like it. So in the course of coming up with policies and programs of government, just as my sister has spoken about, we consider our stakeholders, we engage with them. But nobody, no ministry, no agency single-handedly will claim or own a policy of government. These are some of the problems that I think Hajia Hadiza noticed in the course of MDS that encouraged her to move this forward. So let's try to break cycles within public service and see we're just working for the entire public service and for the citizens of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof, 30 seconds, please.
Yes, 30 seconds, it's much. I just want to bring to the notice of all that are concerned about this issue of stakeholder mapping, if you can find it on page 41. And the discourse there is actually robust on the issue of stakeholder mapping and other issues related to. After evaluating existing policies, the next thing there on page 41 is stakeholder mapping, engagement, and consensus building. I think the discourse there, it's quite robust with respect to mapping your stakeholders. This is a guide. We can't tell you. For Agric is different, for science and tech is different, for petroleum and so on and so forth. So it is you, the policy developer, that will know how to map your stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And so just to bring this to an end, this section, I just wanted to probably highlight 3 or 4 things that I felt very critical that the committee at the technical working group level will, double check to ensure that it's aptly captured. One is around communication of every step around the communication. I know a lot of things we put in there, and also the issue of the template. Dr. Adulojo had mentioned that, so that there will be coherence across the piece. And then also the issue around mandate definition. I know the essay on instruction of the president is doing something around mandate to ensure that, things are actually properly aligned and people whose responsibilities, overlap into others, they try as much as possible to see that the boundaries are clearly set. And then the essay did talk about a paragraph that defines what a policy is, and that's very critical. We'll look and ensure that is aptly captured. I think on that note, I would like to thank everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Umar Abu there. Yes, I like the fact that the claps are coming. Thank you very much. Yes, I think he deserves that. I think he did a yeoman's job doing that, isn't he? Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Umar Abu. Interactive session on policy formulation and adoption. While I want to go to item 14, which if you divide by 2 is similar to item 7, it will be best if we quickly move on so that we don't lose the steam we have gathered thus far. If you agree with me, say yay. The yay is low. If you agree with me, say yay. Thank you. So we move on quickly now to item 15, which is an overview of Chapter 5, Section 3, Policy Implementation by Dr. Oh, what I have here is 15. Sorry? Oh, sorry, okay. Approach, okay.
I just wanted to know if people are okay to continue. It's 3:30. Some people should be hungry. Yeah. Yes, so let's not have this all saying, yeah, nay, no. There's lunch, it's 3:30. Do we want to go and eat lunch and come back? Or do we want to stay and join lunch and dinner, meaning they will serve? People want to have lunch, right? Exactly. So don't do state of emergency type of National Assembly approach.
Okay, do we have a promise that everyone who steps out of this hall will be back in 30 minutes? Everyone who steps out. You're not going to leave from lunch home.
Yes. So at 4 o'clock, we reconvene. People should go and eat. We can even make it 4:10.
Okay, this is part of the policy.
So you eat, you pray, you come back at 4:10, and we're brisk to conclude. But you can't keep people there hungry. I'm sure it's Umar that is pushing that. No lunch, I know. So please, but let's be snappy in coming back, please. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope lunch is ready. Aisha, is it ready? Okay. People know the hall where to go to for lunch? Okay, thank you.